Good evening, and welcome to an evening of music featuring 3 San Diego Symphony musicians in solo works. Our musicians have chosen works by 3 young Black composers to feature tonight, reflecting the incredible diversity of our city and of our country. It is a joy to present the works of these composers to San Diego audiences for the first time. Composers are asked to reflect the time in which they live, and obviously this is a challenging time. In all of their cases, I'm sure performances have been postponed, preventing them from hearing these creative works that have come from their souls and not seeing live performances of them. But tonight we get to hear their music performed in such a beautiful way by our own musicians. Tonight we also join with many others mourning the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who loved music and went to concerts as often as she could. She understood that music expresses our humanity, our similarities and our differences, and it calls us to be together. She stood for justice for all, with no regard to race, gender, or creed. Tonight we dedicate this performance to her lasting memory. Music can lift us up in difficult times. Thank you to these wonderful 3 musicians who have put such care and dedication to performing these works for you tonight, and I hope you enjoy the music.
Allison Loggins-HULL is a composer, flutist, educator, and producer who performs and creates music of multiple genres. Her works have been commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Arts, Alarm Will Sound, and the Library of Congress. As a flutist, she has performed at venues like Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall, with groups such as International Contemporary Ensemble, Imani Winds, the rapper Lizzo, and also her own flute and electronics duo, Flutronics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Allison. Hello, Allison.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
You wear so many different musical hats as a composer, flutist, educator, producer, and also in your own music, I hear a similarly wide range of musical idioms. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the influences in your work?
I mean, when it comes to music, I've always been, ever since I was very, very young, just a huge lover of music in general, not just specifically classical music, not just any one genre. And I grew up in a household where I was fortunate enough to be exposed to a lot of different music from all over the world, really, and very wide ranging. And it's just something that was kind of like ingrained in my ear, in my subconscious, in my brain, since I was a very young child. So when I came out of conservatory, I did my undergraduate in flute performance, and I had a very traditional conservatory type of training. When I came out of that, I was at this place where it's like, I knew I wanted to play the flute. Like, that has never been a question. I knew I always wanted to play. I love my instrument. But I also knew I wasn't exclusively interested in classical music only. So it was at that time where I started exploring, doing kind of, different types of gigs in the city and working with different types of musicians, people like singer-songwriters and like producers and new music people, and also classical music too. I mean, that's never left me, to kind of like figure out what really made me tick, and all of that work is what led me to improvising and then eventually composing. And that felt really good. Once I started doing that, I felt like I had tapped into something about myself that I hadn't previously tapped into. And just as I enjoy playing different types of music and listening to different types of music, just naturally what comes out when I'm creating music is all of these influences. I can't really edit myself from doing that. It's just how it is.
Could you tell us a bit more about the inspiration behind the title and this piece?
So Homeland I wrote in 2018. I was commissioned by the Texas Flute Society to write this piece for a competition they host called the Myrna Brown Competition, which is a pretty big national competition for young flutists, emerging artists here in the United States. They left it very open for me to do pretty much whatever I wanted. I mean, it had to be a competitive piece, so there has to be something to judge. and they wanted a little bit of extended techniques included. The first one would be the use of a timbral trill. So unlike a normal traditional trill, which is just going back and forth between two notes very fast, it's like going between a note that's very pure and the same note that is a little, the tonality might be a little different, like the color might be a little different, but the pitch is not too different. But when they're played together in rapid succession, you can hear that difference. And it has, to me anyway, the timbral trill has a little bit of a kind of mysterious sound quality to it. It's a little questionable. You're kind of like, what's going on here, you know? So I think it's a very like curious sound that that draws people in. The piece came about because during this time, the news cycle was just filled with stories about the Hurricane Maria that happened in Puerto Rico. It was during that time. The crisis that was going on in Syria with their civil war and Syrian refugees. And then also, and very much like what's going on today here in the United States, you know, all the political and just kind of like domestic turmoil that was going on. It just seemed like, you know, these stories were just like constant. And I kept thinking about, you know, what is it as an individual, like, what does it mean when you're living in a place, you're living in your home, like your native land, and like everything is a wreck, you know, either it's been destroyed by a natural disaster or a political disaster, or, you know, you're living in a place where you feel often otherized and you're actually like a native of this place. You know, how do you then look at home in terms of like your country, which is a place that generally I think should bring you comfort or a sense of security, a sense of like community and family. Like, what happens to all that when home is no longer safe, or you no longer feel welcome, or like you can never return? So that is the inspiration behind the piece, and it's just a giant unanswered question, really.
So many of us have been sheltering at home for the past few months because of the COVID pandemic. I'm wondering, for you, has the meaning of home changed at all during these few months?
It hasn't changed so much, though I have really grown to appreciate this time in a way, because I've been able to spend a lot of time with my family, with my children. I mean, normally I travel a lot because of my career. And I was definitely, before COVID happened, I was coming out of a lot of travel. So it's been really nice to kind of be here on the long term and kind of take more of it in. So I've definitely grown to appreciate it perhaps more than I did before. On a macro level, just in terms of being here and in America and being an American, that hasn't really changed much. And my feeling with that has always been a little conflicted. You know, I'm from the United States. My entire family is from the United States, and we've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And, you know, I truly am, my makeup is truly demonstrative of American history. Like, I am the result of everything that has happened. So, so it's interesting that this is like a very, I'm super native to this place, but again, kind of like what I was saying about Homeland, this is also the only place where I have been otherized, you know, where people have come up to me and been like, what are you? You know, that kind of thing. And of course, then we all know everything else that's going on right now, and that has been going on for 400 plus years. So I've always kind of had a conflicted feeling when it comes to like patriotism, for example. You know, it's always been a little bit, there's a lot of things that I love about this place. And there's a lot of things that I appreciate. And I think there have been beautiful things that have come out of America. But there are a lot of things that I find very problematic too. So it's always been this kind of like, thing. And unfortunately, that really hasn't changed, because I haven't seen enough change in recent years anyway, that to sway me, you know, in a different direction so far. I'm hopeful. I think there's potential. I think there's always potential here for all kinds of greatness. But I acknowledge that there's still like an enormous amount of work to do.
Allison, it's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Our next composer, Carlos Simon, is a native of Atlanta, Georgia, whose music ranges from concert music for large and small ensembles to film scores with influences of jazz, gospel, and neo-romanticism. He was recently named one of the recipients of the 2021 Sphinx Medal of Excellence, which is the highest honor bestowed by the Detroit-based Sphinx organization, recognizing extraordinary classical Black and Latinx musicians. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful to be here.
So, how have you been during the pandemic? Have you been keeping busy and musically active?
Well, for a while I was going through a funk, and then it was hard to sort of see the future, because things were just like canceling left and right, and commissions and performances. Actually written several pieces as a means of, just sort of sitting down and having friends that contacted me and say, hey, I don't have any more gigs. Can you write something for me to practice? And it was an opportunity for me to really just to continue to write, and especially for my friends too. So written several COVID inspired pieces.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? It was a great time to kind of really dig deep and to really just set everything down and just focus on my well-being, which is hard to do when you're constantly going and busy and is doing that and going here and there, and so I'm great now, mentally and physically. I'm grateful for my health, and just really looking forward to continuing that state of well-being in the future.
Your piece for solo bass is called Between Worlds and was inspired by the self-taught American visual artist Bill Traylor. Can you tell us a bit more about the title and your inspiration for this piece?
Yeah, sure. I moved to Washington, D.C. from Atlanta, Georgia. And one great thing about DC is the museums, right? It's pre-COVID, there is a wellspring of inspiration at these museums, Smithsonian Museum. So when I went to visit the art gallery at the Smithsonian, and I discovered this exposition, it was amazing. 3 or 4 rooms of just Bill Traylor's work. And it blew my mind just to kind of see it. I was drawn to it. I wanted to discover more about him as a person and as an artist, and what inspired him to create in such a way. He was a self-taught artist, and so a lot of the art is basically on anything that he could find, cardboard and scraps of paper. And learning about his life, he was born a slave. So he ended up seeing the end of slavery, but also the start of Jim Crow and discrimination in the American South. And so you have this person who's seen so much of American culture, but at the same time, he's using his art as a means of conveying his feelings and his frustration and what he's seen in the world. And in Montgomery, Alabama, which I'm sure you know is sort of a hotbed for racism and discrimination in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And when he was a slave, he when the slavery ended, rather, you had many African Americans just confused as to what they would do, not being able to see any future past slavery. And so you're juxtaposing these worlds of being free, but not a citizen, of America. And so I could imagine that he was dealing with that layer. And then, of course, the layer of being African American in this country, and having to develop and be a free person, and so I think that those are the layers that you're dealing with this art, being between and betwixt of these two radically different worlds.
Has anything about this piece changed for you since current events this year?
I've always believed in the systems of oppression that are so infused into our culture as Americans, and so and realizing and really discovering Bill Traylor's life. And discovering, what he went through as an African American man in the 60s, and throughout the Jim Crow era, It's inextricably linked to the systematic racism that he would have experienced in the 60s, and it's essentially the same. You know, of course, we see George Floyd, we see so many others, Breonna Taylor, and the list continues to grow. And you know what? It's the same machine that Bill Traylor experienced. You know, nothing has really changed. It's just and it's the same systematic oppression, and it's linked to slavery. And so when I wrote the piece in 2019, I was, of course, drawn by his life, Bill Traylor's life. But I was not thinking about the idea of police brutality and how it's really linked to systematic oppression when writing the piece. But we can see it now. It's clear. It's clear, and hopefully clear for other people.
The last piece on tonight's program is by the composer, violinist, and educator, JESSIE Montgomery. She was a founding member of the Public Quartet and has recently been commissioned by Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, the National Choral Society, and the New York Philharmonic. Her music interweaves classical with elements of vernacular music, improvisation, language, and social justice. Jessie couldn't join us for an interview tonight, unfortunately, but she has recorded a short introduction to her piece, Rhapsody No. 1, for solo violin.
Hi, I'm violinist and composer Jessie Montgomery, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about my piece, Rhapsody No. 1, for solo violin. I wrote this piece in 2013 for myself to perform on a double bill concert with the lovely Public Quartet at the Cornelia Street Cafe in New York City. This was, from what I remember, a very hot June evening concert in this downstairs venue. It's very New York. The piece is based on a 5-note motive presented right at the beginning that then goes on this rhapsodic journey for about 7 minutes. And you violinists out there will certainly notice that there are some hand positions and some sonorities that are very reflective of the Eugene Izai solo violin sonatas. So that those pieces were very much an influence in writing Rhapsody No. 1. There is also a Rhapsody No. 2 that is actually going to be released this September 18th, 2020 on New Amsterdam Records by the lovely and talented violinist and composer herself, Michi Wianko, on her debut album as a violinist and composer, Planetary Candidate. So please check that out. I hope you enjoy this performance of Rhapsody No. 1.